Couch CageSide with your host, Kyle Delaney for CouchFighter.co. And in this installment, in this first installment, I'd like to talk specifically about the upcoming, the future matchup of Georges St-Pierre versus Nick Diaz. Now, what happened during the events of UFC 137? Nick Diaz defeats BJ Penn in impressive fashion, calls out Georges St-Pierre, says he's not hurt, says, "Where are you at, George?" And, you know, the whole drama ensues. And it's good. I'd say it's pretty good drama, though, is that, you know, now we get this super fight that we were all hoping to see before the whole matchup of Carlos Condit and Georges St-Pierre. Georges St-Pierre got hurt. We finally get to see this super fight. And I think whether you want to call it a super fight or not, but we finally get to see this matchup. And I think it's going to be a great fight. And during Super Bowl weekend, I mean, one can only imagine what is going to happen when these two meet in the cage. Few things, though. One, Carlos Condit. I do feel bad for the guy. Is he fighting Josh Koscheck now? Yes. Would I have preferred Jake Ellenberger for him to fight Ellenberger? Absolutely. See him fight again in a rematch and decide who top contender is? Absolutely. Do I also feel bad that, you know, he was promised his title shot, but Dana White pushed him, called him up after UFC 137, and he stepped aside. Said Georges St-Pierre wants to fight Nick Diaz. You know, the champion calls his match. But, you know, he steps aside. Do you feel bad for him? Yeah, sure, absolutely. You know, twice in 1 week. One, Georges St-Pierre is hurt. You're not fighting at 137. They don't reschedule you to fight, and they don't have you fight anybody, even though Koscheck stepped up at that time to fight with about 2 weeks' notice. And then after that, you get promised your title shot, and then you lose your title shot to Nick Diaz. Yes, it is unfortunate, but that's the business. Okay, Dana White's a businessman, whether you like it or not. Nick Diaz versus Georges St-Pierre draws more money. Okay, more than Condit versus GSP. It comes down to money. Okay, and that's going to be a huge pay-per-view draw. So it comes down to money. It comes down to the marketability. And it's not bashing Carlos Condit, but Nick Diaz is going to sell this fight. Georges St-Pierre will sell it however he does with his classy attitude. But this is a fight that people want to see. This is a fight that people want to see at 137. So it stinks for Condit. He does get his matchup. Hopefully he gets his title shot down the road. And hopefully we don't see Josh Koscheck win that fight and get a title shot. Because if GSP wins, I don't think anybody wants to see him absolutely demoralize Koscheck again. So that being said, moving forward into this, Georges St-Pierre, you know, he looked rattled. And here's one thing I'd like to add before I'm going to break down the fight and do my prediction. One thing I'd like to add is that when Nick Diaz was taken off the card at 137, obviously he was put back on to fight BJ Penn. The one thing that I'd say, I want to say irked me a little bit is that, you know, you ask for your fight against Diaz now, and, you know, Diaz obviously didn't show up to the press conferences going into 137. They forced him to get taken off the card with the beauty pageants that he likes to call them. But, you know, Dana White wanted to take him off the card. But you know what? If you spoke up and said you wanted to fight Nick Diaz, we still might have saw that fight at 137. Okay? I'm not saying that Georges St-Pierre's scared, but I will never say that. But it was just kind of weird is that, you know, now you want to fight Nick Diaz. Obviously, he called you out, and I understand that. But, you know, you could have said it before, too. If you really wanted to fight Nick Diaz, if you didn't show up to the press conference, you could have been like, Dana, I still want to fight the guy. Okay? And he probably would have been like, you know what, I could look aside from this. I know it's Nick Diaz being Nick Diaz. He doesn't show up to the presser sometimes. But if you really wanted to fight him, you would have said something beforehand. But now you really want to, and, you know, Diaz obviously called you out. That's his style, and GSP's more of a classy guy. But I still think that, you know, if you spoke up instead of saying, oh, Carlos Condit would be a good matchup too, if you said, I want to fight Diaz, I think Dana White would have given you the matchup. So, you know, I like to bring that up. I kind of question that a little bit. Okay, so now you know, obviously this matchup comes up in Super Bowl weekend, and we're all looking forward to it for the welterweight championship of the world. Let's go down the fighters. Georges St-Pierre. Georges St-Pierre is one of the most balanced fighters in all of MMA. He is a freakish athlete. He eats, sleeps, and breathes MMA. Literally, that's the guy. And, you know, they all joke about Koscheck joked about him being a robot, but he really, like, he is. This is his life. And I know guys devote their lives to MMA, but GSP is the poster child for MMA. I mean, really. I mean, it's not that he's a face guy, but the guy really does train every single day, day in, day out. This is what his life revolves around. I know guys have lives outside this, but GSP is it. There's no guy that trains harder. I mean, really, there's very few guys on that list in MMA that train harder than GSP. His work ethic is exceptional, but he is one of the most balanced and most freakishly athletic fighters. He's cleaned out the welterweight division. Very few, people can stand and train with him, but he has great balance striking. His boxing's great. He uses his legs to his advantage, and his footwork is great. And the one thing, though, is that, GSP can go in sports science all he wants. I doubt one thing is that he does not have knockout power. Okay, and I know it's a smaller weight division, but he doesn't have knockout power. Neither does Nick Diaz, though, lucky for him. But GSP has the speed and the athleticism in his stand-up game. And his kicks are great, and his combinations, and his jab. Okay, this is going to be interesting to see which fighter has the better jab in this fight. GSP showed us the stick jab when he fought Georges St-Pierre, and he literally, he fractured his St-Pierre's orbital bone in the process just by throwing a jab. More fighters are starting to learn the jab, and GSP showed us in that St-Pierre fight. He wasn't the first guy, but he shows the big importance of knowing a jab. And GSP's combos are great. You never know what he's going to throw. Spinning back fist, front kick. The guy throws, he never throws the same thing twice. He's so dynamic, and even Superman punches, he's in and out of the pocket so fast. That's not even adding on top of his great wrestling game. Georges St-Pierre's wrestling is definitely the top, some of the best in MMA. His single leg, his double leg, his clinch ability, he could take you down and he could keep you there. And he has great ground and pound, and he works for the most part. Okay, lately not so much, but GSP uses his wrestling, and he is very good about being comfortable when he fights. Okay, he could take you wherever he wants. He's comfortable in most places. Okay, so Georges St-Pierre has great wrestling. He'll keep you there. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He can also submit you as well. So Georges St-Pierre, like I said, one of the most balanced guys in all of MMA. Great stand-up, great wrestling, some of the best wrestling, and great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Okay, now he also has great cardio. He works a great pace, and he is always comfortable because he's always in his comfort zone. Like most champions, they're never out of their comfort zone. The one thing is, though, is that there's a couple things. Georges St-Pierre, is he a tough guy? Yes. But I don't think Georges St-Pierre likes to get hit very much. He does not like to take a hit. I don't think he can't stand and bang with guys, stand up and start trading punches. That's why he takes you down. But Georges St-Pierre doesn't like to get hit. And Nick Diaz combination punches, I'll question that. How many hits can he take from Diaz? He might take him down and lay there. But he also said, this is the one thing I also say too, is that he said he was going to put a beating on Nick Diaz. Now, if you go into this fight for 5 rounds and you lay or you wrestle with Nick Diaz for 5 rounds, obviously you're going to use your ground pound, but you better put a beating. You better stand up with the guy and give him a little bit of his own medicine. If you're going to say you're putting a beating on a guy, and the other day he says, GSP comes out and says, I want to finish fights, I'd love to see, the only way, and this is coming from a Nick Diaz fan, and I respect Georges St-Pierre, the only way I'd like to see Nick Diaz lose this fight is by being finished by Georges St-Pierre. I'd be happy with that fight. Hands down, to see Nick Diaz lose. Okay, so, obviously I said GSP doesn't like to get hit. He doesn't have true knockout power. And, it'll be interesting to see how this fight pans out for Georges St-Pierre's side. That's Georges St-Pierre. Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz is one of the best technical boxers in all of MMA. I put him on my top 3 list, hands down, up there with the Dos Santoses and the Frankie Edgars and, obviously the Anderson Silvas. But Nick Diaz is one of the best technical boxers in all of MMA, and that shows training with Andre Ward. Okay, Nick Diaz wanted to go and do boxing. He might be successful there, but he's a great mixed martial artist. Nick Diaz is a tough freaking guy. Okay, his boxing's great. His combination punches are great. His jab is awesome. It's exceptional, his jab, and how he sets it up. His range is great. Obviously, reach won't be a big factor in this fight with Georges St-Pierre. But Nick Diaz, he's so accurate with his strikes. He does throw a lot of strikes, but he does land a lot, and his combination punching is exceptional. Now, Nick Diaz, though, lacks true knockout power as well. But what he does is he chops you down. He uses body shots. There's no fighter that uses their jab and body shots. We learned this in the BJ Penn fight. We see it in a lot of other Diaz fights. But look, he did, obviously he used his jab to nick up and mess up BJ Penn's eye on his jab hand. But at the same time, the body shots were the most significant factor in the fight with BJ Penn. He chopped BJ Penn down and he killed his cardio. And the pace that Nick Diaz pushes, there's no fighter with better cardio than Nick Diaz. The guy does triathlons. He pushes the pace. And it'll be interesting to see. I said Georges St-Pierre doesn't like to be put out of his comfort zone. Nick Diaz is the first guy that could probably put him out of his comfort zone, even though he lacks a true wrestling game. We're going to have to see, but I still think Nick Diaz pushes the pace where he could probably put GSP out of his comfort zone. Probably, I say. All right, all you guys who love GSP, and no, obviously we all know GSP, he's very comfortable in fights. Nick Diaz has a very good chance of putting Georges St-Pierre out of his comfort zone. So, Nick Diaz, great boxing. He is not a true wrestler, though. That will be a disadvantage for him in this fight, but what he makes up for it with is his great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, I think the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the BJJ in this fight is a wash, or it's even. But it'll be interesting to see. Okay, Nick Diaz has been fighting longer than Georges St-Pierre. That's a fact. Okay, he actually said that the other day on MMA Live when he was being interviewed. But he's also fought longer than GSP. I'm not saying he's the better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, but it'll be interesting to see how he implements his BJJ with Georges St-Pierre's wrestling. If he rolls like he did against BJ Penn, and rolls with them, obviously GSP is going to roll with him too. The interesting to see if Nick Diaz is fighting off his back, he's going to eat a lot of ground and pound, but you know his BJJ could keep him defend him on his back. And not to mention Nick Diaz's takedown defense was pretty good. This is coming from a guy, he fought BJ Penn. BJ Penn did take him down, but his takedown defense was good. And remember, BJ Penn did take down John Fitch, an elite wrestler, in their last fight that was to a draw. So to say Nick Diaz, it is a disadvantage he doesn't know wrestling, but his takedown defense, his sprawl is pretty good for a guy who doesn't have a true wrestling game. But that, again, comparing BJ Penn and John Fitch to GSP is completely different. Okay, GSP is on his own level, pretty much. He's up there in the elite. I'm not saying John Fitch isn't, but GSP is a rare breed. So it'll be interesting to see how the wrestling pans out in this fight and how Nick Diaz can handle Georges St-Pierre's wrestling. So, Nick Diaz, great technical boxer. His cardio is great. The pace that he pushes exhausts fighters. And I said GSP has a good cardio. But he could put GSP out of his comfort zone, like I said. And this being a 5-round fight, you know, I'm not saying GSP gets tired. The guy's a freakish athlete, but it would be interesting to see how he can do in 5 rounds at Nick Diaz's pace. And it'll be interesting if Nick Diaz can put his pace on Georges St-Pierre. And the trash talking will be big. GSP's a very focused fighter, but will he be egged into the Nick Diaz trash talk and be tempted to stand up and try and strike? Who knows how this will pan out? And obviously, there's a couple disadvantages for Nick Diaz. One being the lack of wrestling, and the other one being Nick Diaz gets cut very easily. And GSP gets bloodied up too. I mean, we saw him after the Shields fight. That wasn't just that he was poked in the eye, but Nick Diaz gets cut all the freaking time. The guy is always cut. He's always bleeding. The only thing I'm concerned about, and Nick Diaz is a tough guy. He has, like I said before, an advantage for him. He has a great chin. It allows him to stand and trade and counter-strike. That's what he does so well. He can stand in the pocket, he eats punches, then he attacks you. He has a great chin. That's the one thing I should have said, is that Nick Diaz has a great chin. But a disadvantage is that Nick Diaz gets cut very easily. And if this fight, you know, fights could always stop by a doctor stoppage. It could happen. We don't know. I mean, look what GSP did to Josh Koscheck with his strikes. You know, he could bloody up Nick Diaz and the fight could be stopped. So that is a disadvantage. The prediction, okay, that's Nick Diaz. That's Nick Diaz in a nutshell. The prediction I have in this fight, in a 5-round fight, this is how I see it panning out. The first 3 rounds, I see it going back and forth. I see GSP getting Nick Diaz onto the mat. I see them standing toe-to-toe and trading with each other. There's a lot of pride riding on this fight. I do not think GSP is going to lay on the ground with him for 5 rounds. Nick Diaz on the ground for 5 rounds. Okay, they are going to stand up. I see it being back and forth for 3 rounds. In round 4, okay, I see Nick Diaz catching GSP. Okay, I see the cardio. I see it wearing, I mean, GSP getting worn down just a little bit. Okay, if I see Nick Diaz's cardio being an advantage, I see Nick Diaz catching Georges St-Pierre in the 4th round. I see him jumping all over him, using the body shots, and they're going to add up. Okay, like I said, it's going to go back and forth for 3 rounds. It's going to add up. Georges St-Pierre is going to take a beating, and like I said, Diaz is going to take a beating too. But I see Nick Diaz catching Georges St-Pierre in the 4th, jumping all over him, and winning this fight by TKO in the 4th round and becoming the new welterweight champion in the UFC and one of the best welterweight fighters in the world. And that's how I see this event, this fight panning out. And, you know, GSP could win. I think GSP wins this fight. You know, he said he wants to finish. I think GSP wins this fight by unanimous decision. That's how I see it panning out. But I say Nick Diaz, 4th round, TKO, new welterweight champion of the world. And, you know what, GSP will rebound from this just fine. And that's what I have for this prediction. This is Kyle Delaney from the CageSide Couch, signing off. Have a great day, everybody.